The story so far. The arrival of Miss Mary Morstan brought Sherlock Holmes a strange case. After accompanying her to the appointment, we learned a secret that would bring her immense wealth. It was nearly 11 o'clock when we reached this final stage of our night's adventures. An unexpected obstacle appeared that took Mr. Thaddeus Sholto by surprise. His brother Bartholomew had not given the porter McMurdo permission to allow us to enter, which made him look perplexed and helpless.
"I had no orders about them from the master, Mr. Thaddeus,"
said the porter inexorably.
"I don't know none are your friends."
"Oh yes, you do, McMurdo,"
cried Sherlock Holmes genially.
"Don't you remember the amateur who fought 3 rounds with you at Alison's rooms on the night of your benefit for years back?"
"Sherlock Holmes,"
roared the prize fighter.
"In you come, sir, in you come you and your friends. Very sorry, Mr. Thaddeus, but orders are very strict. Had to be certain of your friends before I let them in."
This sudden turn of events made the night, which should have gone smoothly, become uncertain, however. As it turned out, this ominous premonition was correct. Inside, a gravel path wound through desolate grounds to a huge clump of a house. From the great black house there sounded through the silent night the saddest and most pitiful of sound, the shrill, broken whimpering of a frightened woman.
"It is Mrs. Bernstone,"
said Sholto.
"She is the housekeeper in the house. Wait here, I shall be back in a moment."
He hurried for the house. A tall old woman admit him and sway with pleasure at the very sight of him.
"Oh, Mr. Thaddeus, sir, I am so glad you have come."
This unexpected event made us seem ill at ease. Miss Morstan and I stood together, and her hand was in mine. A wondrous subtle thing is love, for here were we two, who had never seen each other before that day, and now in an hour of trouble our hands instinctively sought for each other. After a while, the door of the house burst open, and Thaddeus Sholto came running out, with his hands thrown forward and terror in his eyes.
"There is something amiss with Bartholomew,"
he cried.
"I am frightened. My nerves cannot stand it."
Thaddeus Sholto's teeth were chattering in his head, and his twitching, feeble face had the helpless, appealing expression of a terrified child.
"Come into the house,"
sighed Holmes, in his crisp, firm way.
"Yes, do,"
pleaded Thaddeus Sholto.
"I really do not feel equal to giving directions."
Mrs. Bernstone, the housekeeper, also came with us, somewhat scared and restless. The company of Miss Mary Morstan could relieve her stress.
"Master has locked himself in, and will not answer me,"
she explained, after the colour back into her bloodless cheeks.
"An hour ago I went up and peeped through the keyhole. You must go up and look for yourself."
Sherlock Holmes took the lamp and led the way until we found the door which we were seeking. After a brief observation, we decided to break in. In a wooden armchair, the master of the house was seated all in a heap, with his head sunk upon his left shoulder, and that ghastly, inscrutable smile upon his face. He was stiff and cold, and had clearly been dead many hours. Beside the body was a torn sheet of notepaper, with some words scrawled upon it. Holmes glanced at it, and then handed it to me.
"You see,"
he said, with a significant raising of the eyebrows. In the light of the lantern I read, with a thrill of horror, the sign of the 4. Holmes stooping over the dead man, and then pointed to what looked like a long dark thorn stuck in the skin, just above the ear. "It looks like a thorn," said I.
"It is a thorn. You may pick it out. But be careful, for it is poisoned."
"The treasure is gone,"
Mr. Thaddeus Sholto suddenly cried.
"They have robbed him of the treasure."
He jerked his arms and stamped his feet in a kind of convulsive frenzy.
"Take my advice, and drive down to the station to report the matter to the police,"
said Holmes kindly, putting his hand upon his shoulder.
"Offer to assist them in every way. We shall wait here until your return."
The little man obeyed in a half-stupefied fashion, and we heard him stumbling down the stairs in the dark.
"Now, Watson,"
said Holmes, rubbing his hands.
"we have half an hour to ourselves. Let us make good use of it. In the first place, how did these folk come, and how did they go? The door has not been opened since last night. How of the window?
He carried the lamp across to it, and soon made a discovery.
See here, Watson, it is the impression of a wooden stump. You see here on the sill is the boot mark, a heavy boot with a broad metal heel, and beside it is the mark of the timber toe.
It is the wooden-legged man.
Quite so. But there has been someone else, a very able and efficient ally. Suppose you had a friend up here who lowered you this good stout rope which I see in the corner, securing one end of it to this great hook in the wall. Then, I think, if you were an active man, you might swarm up, wooden leg and all.
How came this mysterious ally into the room, then? Said I. The door is locked. The window is inaccessible. Was it through the chimney? After ruling out the door, windows, and chimney, we simultaneously thought of the hole in the roof that the Sholto brothers had made to access the treasure, however improbable. He came through the hole in the roof, I cried.
Of course he did. We shall now extend our researches to the room above, the secret room in which the treasure was found.
Holmes mounted the steps, and, seizing a rafter with either hand, he swung himself up into the garret, while I followed him. The floor of chamber was formed by the rafters, with thin lath plaster between, so that in walking one had to step from beam to beam.
Here you are,
said Sherlock Holmes, putting his hand against the sloping wall.
This is a trapdoor which number 1 entered. Let us see if we can find some other traces of his individuality.
Due to the accumulated dust of years lay thick upon the floor, the traces were easy to find, yet the specific discovery astonished us all. The floor was covered thickly with the prints of a naked foot, clear, well-defined, perfectly formed, but scarce half the size of those of an ordinary man. What is your theory, then, as to those footmarks? I asked eagerly, when we had regained the lower room once more.
It will be clear enough to you soon.
Holmes whipped out his lens and a tape measure, and hurried about the room on his knees, measuring, comparing, examining, and finally he broke out into a loud crow of delight.
We are certainly in luck,
said he.
Number 1 has had the misfortune to tread in the creosote, and I know a dog that would follow that scent to the world's end.
Heavy steps and the clamour of loud voices were audible from below.
Before they come,
said Holmes,
just put your hand here on this poor fellow's arm, and here on his leg. What do you feel?
The muscles are as hard as a board, I answered.
Quite so. They are in a state of extreme contraction, far exceeding the usual rigor mortis. Coupled with this distortion of the face, this smile, what conclusion would it suggest to your mind?
Death from some powerful vegetable alkaloid, I answered with my profession, based on my expertise.
With all these data you should be able to draw some just inference. And now, here they came.
As Holmes spoke, a very stout, portly man in a grey suit strode heavily into the room.
I think you must recollect me, Mr. Athelney Jones,
said Holmes quietly.
Of course I do,
he wheezed.
It's Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the theorist. Ha! I have a theory. This Thaddeus Sholto had a quarrel with his brother. The brother is dead and the jewels are gone. Then no one saw the brother from the time Thaddeus left him. The only question is, how did he depart? Ah, of course, here is a hole in the roof.
With great activity, he sprang up the steps and squeezed through into the garret, and then he also found our earlier discovery.
You see,
said the fat detective, pompously.
Facts are better than theories, after all. My view of the case is confirmed. Inspector.
After the deduction of him, Mr. Thaddeus Sholto was taken away. Holmes promised to clear him, although this also mocked by the fat detective. He then decided to stay and continue the investigation, while I was assigned other tasks, though I first needed to escort Miss Mary back home.
To be honest, even though I had envisioned countless possibilities for tonight, I could never have anticipated such a bizarre and sore turn of events. But why did I place my hand in this man's at that moment? Could it be Yet now he seems so cold and distant. Does he have no interest in me at all?